Good morning. The patch 0.3 for Path of Exile 2's early access is now only days away, and therefore the most common question I am getting in my stream every day is what builds will most likely be good as league starters, or more specifically, what will I be league starting in the upcoming patch? So for the purpose of trying to answer this question, I am starting a small video series up until the launch of 0.3 in which I will be presenting my picks for what I think will be possibly viable league starters. Before we start off this video though, I should absolutely emphasize that yes, we do have the full patch notes and resulting skill and balance changes, and looking what worked well as starter builds in the previous league will give us some pointers on what will most likely still be viable in the next league. But what is missing so far is the full new passive tree, which we now know has gotten a huge makeover with over 150 new notables, new clusters, and probably a lot of changes in the current clusters as well. So take this and other videos like this with a huge grain of salt. We can definitely draw conclusions from the last leak and the announced changes in the patch notes. But without the actual full passive tree, a video like this should never be seen as an actual league starter build guide. As soon as we have the full information, including the passive tree, or other last minute balance changes, I will update these videos and the corresponding written mobalytics guides as soon as possible. So with all of that out of the way, the first build that I will be presenting here today is what I think is pretty far up the list of possibly viable league starters 4.3 is the Essence Drain Contagion Chaos build. I played this build on a Lich as a league starter in Dawn of the Hunt, and I fully expect this to still be an insanely good build to start your league off with this, even in the 0.3 patch. This build is extremely easy to set up. You are basically using the same skill setup from level 1 all the way into the endgame. It is especially suited towards newer players with its basic rotation, relaxed playstyle, and easy itemization. In 0.2, it was one of the builds that had, in my opinion, one of the easiest times in campaign, and upon reaching the endgame, this build functions very well as a mapper, especially if you take the Lich and make use of all the defensive layers that Ascendancy has to offer. I should also mention that this build is definitely more of a league starter though, and does hit a damage scaling ceiling at a certain point. Although I did all the T4 Pinnacle content in Dawn of the Hunt with this build, I did end up switching my Ascendancy to Blood Mage and build with higher damage scaling capabilities at a certain point into the league. Due to the build's damage being mostly DoT based, the scaling will hit a maximum at a certain point, but since we can now easily switch Ascendancies, transitioning this build into another more end league based build at a certain point is very, very easy. This video right here will mostly be focused on the campaign aspect of the build. If you want to see the full and completed endgame version and its corresponding video and written guide, check out the video I did for this build in 0.2 that will be linked in the description of this video. This guide still applies even in 0.3, even with the missing passive tree changes, so if you want to follow this build, that video and attached written guide will show you everything you need for getting this build off the ground. So let's first look at what might have changed for this build in the 0.3 patch notes. So first of all quality on the Contagion skill gem now affects the number of targets affected by your Contagion, which is a very nice buff to that skill. Before this, a lot of the ED Contagion builds were using support gems like Unleash for clear on Contagion. This might not be needed anymore now with this change and makes Contagion even better. Another buff to the build is the increased chaos resistance minus inflicted by your Despair debuff. Also a very nice buff to the build since we are using Despair a lot on both monsters for clear, paired with Dark Effigy, and for bosses, of course. Bosses overall do take less exposure effect now though, but overall this change to Despair is also very, very nice for this build. Another very good change is that the Chaos Bolt that you get through the Withered One base now applies stacks of the Withered debuff to the attacked monster. This is another big buff to the build. The Withered debuff is a very good damage bonus for single target damage, which is definitely something that this build needed some improvement on. This paired with the now stronger Chaos Bolt coming from the Withered Wand, this is probably one of the best changes to this build in the patch notes right here. So these three changes all improve the build overall. This added on top of the new runes we have gotten in 0.21. That added spell damage levels to 1s. This build definitely has become stronger since the start of Dawn of the Hunt. Okay, to show off everything related to this character right here, I made a new witch character right here. This is level 24, and this is basically everything you will ever need for the campaign here. We basically have everything right now already on the level 24 here. The only things missing is the level 31 skills of Despair and Dark Effigy, but that is going to come a little bit later. Everything we have right here is what we need to get through the campaign. Starting off with Contagion right here, I'm using Unleash and Magnified Effect on Contagion. For Essence Drain, I'm using Swift Affliction and Zenith. For clear, when we are just doing masses of mobs and we are not doing any boss type content, I am switching out Zenith for chain. That is because it makes it so much easier to just chain the Essence Drain on the multiple mobs, and you basically have to only cast it once. I will show it in a second here. And then you start up with Contagion, and then you use Essence Drain with chain, and you hit like 2 or 3 mobs with the Essence Drain, and you just need the Contagion to spread the Essence Drain debuff. For very, very early in the campaign, I'm also adding Flame Wall with Arcane Tempo. I'm also adding Unearth with Feeding Frenzy and Minion Instability. And also for very early campaign, I'm using Frostbomb with Fast Forward and Concentrated Effect. When you feel like you don't need this anymore, basically I am on level 24 now. I am in Act 2 here. I'm towards the end of Act 2 here now. I don't need Unearth anymore, I don't need Frostbomb anymore, and I don't need Flame Wall anymore. For very early in the campaign, and especially like Act 1 or something, this is very, very nice. And if you feel like you really like using these as some extra damage, and especially Unearth, I think is super, super nice to get like a meat shield of minions at all times. But if you feel like you don't need them anymore, you can just remove them and you don't need them anymore. Also, when you are finished with your first spirit quest, that is the King in the Mist in Freythorn in Act 1, you can add Withering Presence into your build. This applies the Wither debuff, which is super, super nice. And I'm using Withering Presence with Persistence here. So, like I said, a very, very basic rotation. I also should mention that Contagion is very nice damage early on, but the later you go into the campaign and the later you go into your levels and everything, the level to Contagion becomes less and less important. You can definitely level this up, but if you feel like you're running into mana problems at some point, you don't really need to upgrade Contagion anymore at some stage, because basically Contagion, the later you go, is not going to be here for damage. Mostly, it is only here to spread the debuff of Essence Drain, the DoT of Essence Drain. Contagion, very good damage early on, later doesn't really do any damage, and then it's only there to spread the Essence Drain. So I'm just going to show off how a basic rotation for this build shows off and how this plays when I find some mobs right here. It is super, super easy to play. There is probably not a build in the game right now that is easier to play. I ran completely the wrong way, that's awesome. And as soon as I find some mobs, I can just show you what this build is about. It is super, super easy. So I will put Chain into Essence Drain here for this type of content. And then it is so easy. We just go Contagion into Essence Drain, it changed to the mobs, and then it just keeps spreading once the mobs die. So the way I'm doing it mostly is I wait for a bunch of mobs to gather up, I drop Contagion, I put them on Essence Train. I drop maybe another Contagion if you just don't hit them all at the same time or whatever. And then it just keeps spreading. And then you can also do the kind of thing that if you are running and you're taking the mobs that have the Contagion and the Essence Train debuff on them, you can always try to kind of carry them into the new group of monsters on the next time. For extra damage and some extra meat shields, what I really like using is on Earth here. So when you have some corpses on the ground, you can then use on Earth on them, and then you just have some extra nice meat shield and some nice extra damage with the on Earth monsters. That is basically everything you need. Once you reach a certain level, you get Contagion right at level 1, and then you get Essence Train at level 3. Like I said, the only thing that is missing is the Dark Effigy Totem that you will get at level 31. And Despair, same level, also level 31. This will even more increase your single target damage, but also Dark Effigy you can very, very easily use in pair with Despair and the Cursed Ground. You just plop down a Dark Effigy on the ground, you plop down Despair, and the Dark Effigy Totem just is a very nice damage addition here. So that is basically everything you need for this build to work out. All the skill gems you need, all the support gems you need for getting through all of the campaign here. So like I said, if you want the full endgame version of this build, the video that I did in 0.2 will be linked in the description of this video here. This is more the campaign setup that I am presenting right here. So if you need the absolute endgame look of this build and everything that relates to this build in the endgame sense, check out the video I did in 0.2 that is linked in the description right here. Also in the Mobalytics guide that will be linked in the description in this video as well, I did everything from level 1 to 60 and then from 60 right into the endgame of all the maps. It is completely separated into smaller parts, so you can basically take this build and the Mobalytics guide from level 1 into the endgame. So that is going to be it for this short League starter concept here for 0.3. This, like I said, this was really, really good in 0.2. I expect this to be one of the best League starters in 0.3. Again, even if we don't have all the passive tree changes right now, I kind of expect this build to be even better once we have the passive tree changes, because there are just going to be so many clusters in the area that this build likes already. So stay posted for this. As soon as we have the passive tree, as soon as something changes about this build, or when I decide on a League starter that I will be using for my start, I will update everything here on my video. So drop a subscribe on the YouTube channel here, or drop a follow on my Twitch stream where I am streaming every single day. And that is the best way to just stay up to date on what I will be doing in POE 2.3 at all times. Okay, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one. Love you. Bye.